He's a charismatic, high-profile Indian politician, a former diplomat and a highly successful author. He's critical of the British Empire, the rise of Hindu nationalism and Pakistan's position on Kashmir. But he's also accused of being too liberal, too close to the Prime Minister Narendra-Modi, and in the latest controversy, he faces trial over the death of his wife. I'm Shiulie Ghosh, and I speak to Shashi Tharoor one-on-one.
These charges are preposterous and baseless. There isn't a shred of truth in what the media claims the police are alleging. We still have to look at the charge sheet and see what exactly they are alleging. Suddenly I find in recent years a version of my own faith being unleashed on the public that I don't really recognize. Hindutva is not Hinduism. Hindutva is a political ideology that only was born in the 1920s. The very word was written at a time when people around the world were growing up to issues of fascism, of race pride, of nationalist assertion. Many Muslim and Christian friends feel beleaguered. There have been indeed attacks on human beings in the name of protecting cows. We've had a couple of cases of mob lynching because the triumphant majoritarianism unleashed by the present ruling party has empowered them to do this.
Thank you very much indeed for speaking with us. Let me start with the latest issue that you're facing. You've been charged with abetting the suicide of your wife, Sunanda, and you are going to face a trial over this. How are you feeling about that?
Well, not great, as you can imagine. But on the other hand, I've already said in public that these charges are preposterous and baseless. There isn't a shred of truth in what the media claims the police are alleging. We still have to look at the charge sheet and see what exactly they are alleging. And we will have full faith in the judicial system. We'll face up to the legal process. I've cooperated at every stage with the investigation. I'm not going to stop cooperating now. It's a question of ensuring that justice is done.
Obviously, this is a live case. It's an ongoing case. I know we can't talk about this, but can I just ask you, how stressful is this for you? And do you worry that it's going to impact on your political career?
Well, look, in public life in India, unfortunately, you don't have the luxury of worrying too much about yourself. So what I'm going through is almost beside the point. I think the important issue is that the ideas I stand for, the values I've tried to promote throughout my public life, should continue to have my voice, and I intend to be able to lend my voice to those things. Ultimately, it's not an easy profession that I've chosen for myself, and I will have to deal with whatever comes my way.
Let's talk about your latest book, Why I Am a Hindu. You explore the concepts and the practices of Hinduism. How worried are you about the rise of the more extremist nationalistic form of Hinduism in India?
I'm very worried, and that's a significant reason why I wrote this book. Because as I know, I grew up as a Hindu in India, took a lot of things for granted, including the fact that the Hindus I knew tended to be extremely accepting of people of other faiths, other ways of living and believing. And suddenly I find in recent years a version of my own faith being unleashed on the public that I don't really recognize, a deeply politicized, narrow-minded, intolerant view of a faith which is the opposite of all of those things. And so the moral urgency to address the issue and to say, I'm sorry, this is not what Hinduism is all about. And here's the Hinduism that most of us who call ourselves Hindu have grown up with, understood, learned, and cherished. And I'm very pleased to say that since the book's come out, I've been getting a lot of feedback from a wide variety of people in India saying, you speak for us. You've described the Hinduism we've always known but couldn't give words to.
But clearly there is a section of the population that doesn't speak to Hindutva as a political force. I mean, how endemic is that? And is it directly responsible for the increasing number of attacks we've seen on non-Hindu communities?
Well, that's precisely the concern I've got, Shiulie. I mean, the fact is that we can't put a number on it. We don't know. The party that's now ruling us, which is seen as an embodiment of Hindutva ideology, won 31% of the vote. But I know for a fact that not everyone who voted for them thought they were voting for Hindutva. Many of them were seduced by the economic development message that Mr. Modi articulated during his campaign. And so I would say the real number is somewhere below 30% of people who actually share this sort of view of Hinduism, and therefore the vast majority of Hindus are not there. That's why in many ways I feel I'm speaking for a majority of Hindus. Secondly, it's important to understand that Hindutva is not Hinduism. Hindutva is a political ideology that only was born in the 1920s. The very word was written at a time when people around the world were growing up to issues of fascism, of race pride, of nationalist assertion. The RSS that came into existence in India as a torchbearer of this sort of view in the 1920s was very alike the movements that supported Mussolini in Italy or Hitler in Germany, right to khaki shorts and military-style exercises.
Why is it gathering ground now in India?
Well,
why are these mobs going around, the cow protection mobs as they call themselves, slaughtering innocent Muslims?
That's right. Well, thank God the numbers are not quite as dramatic. We're talking about half a dozen incidents. That's half a dozen too many.
Okay, well, according to the US State Department, there have been religiously motivated killings, assaults, riots, restrictions on the right to practice religious
That's right.
discrimination, attacks on property, and Muslims and Christians are being targeted.
In fact, many Muslim and Christian friends feel beleaguered. I mean, I don't need the US State Department to tell me what's going on in my own country. I can tell you that I see it around me in some parts. And of course, the Indian media, thank God, is still free enough to report what's going on. So there have been indeed attacks on human beings in the name of protecting cows. We've had a couple of cases of mob lynchings of people. We've had Dalits, whose profession often involves skinning dead cows, being caught and flogged and so on. So you've had a number of elements who have been unleashed, who've become freer to misbehave because the triumphant majoritarianism unleashed by the present ruling party has empowered them to do this. I'm not suggesting the government either wants or condones all of this, but there is no doubt that the government, by the kind of language and the fact that it itself represents Hindutva ideology, has made these people feel empowered enough to go out and do what they've done.
And you say that these are...
It becomes a political battle as well.
This is a minority. You don't believe that the majority of your fellow Hindus believe in this narrow definition of Hinduism. Why then are they not doing more? Why are the liberal thinking classes standing by and allowing this to happen? Because they have been accused of apathy.
No, I don't think that's entirely fair. There is an ongoing battle. It's a battle for India's soul, really. And many of us who are in the forefront of that battle, articulating an alternative view, have been doing so quite passionately in the last 4 years since these elements have been in power. The fact is that in a democracy, political contestation involves more than one side, more than one point of view. But apathy, I would certainly disagree with. The rejection of this kind of bigotry is central to most of the opposition parties' approach when they oppose the BJP. India's democracy has the challenge that it's divided into multiple parties. There are over 35 parties in parliament today. There won seats in, even amid Mr. Modi's landslide in 2014. But all of them, with the exception of Mr. Modi's party and one other party allied to him, reject Hindutva as a political ideology and reject this kind of bigotry
other
against
parties
India's
are
minorities.
embracing multiculturalism.
Absolutely.
They're embracing other religions.
Absolutely. And let's face it, even the government of India pays official lip service, even under the BJP, to multiculturalism and pluralism and multiple identities. Mr. Modi has been photographed, at least in foreign countries, embracing Muslim priests and going to masjids and so on, and to churches. So there is a certain, some would argue, insincere genuflection before the altar of multiculturalism and multi-religious tolerance. But in practice in India, there is no doubt that it's the forces of intolerance who have been running rampant in the last few years.
Do you feel that you are critical enough of Narendra Modi? You've been criticised by members of your own party for being perhaps a little too close to him.
No, I've actually I've been I've been criticized because I agreed to his request to join a specific campaign, which I considered a non-political campaign, for a cleaner India, the Swachh Bharat initiative, where he named 9 people as sort of his brand ambassadors for this initiative when he first launched it, and I was one of the 9. And there were indeed some people in my party who felt that I should not be giving aid and comfort to the enemy, as it were, by agreeing to this. And I said, look, sanitation is surely above politics. Mahatma Gandhi, before independence, said that sanitation is more important than independence. And every government led by my party, the Congress Party, has had sanitation programs which have been well funded and under-publicized. So I think it was necessary, in my view, to support this particular initiative. In the end, of course, it didn't work out because it turned out to be underfunded and over-publicized in the case of Mr. Modi. He's very good at marketing initiatives, less good at delivering results on the ground. And on other issues, whether it's economic issues, the government's tendency, as I've called it, to be a name-changing rather than a game-changing government in terms of taking on our schemes, changing the name and claiming credit for them, the disaster of the demonetization that was unleashed on the people of India 2 years ago, the botched rollout of a goods and services tax that could have been good for the country, and across the board on the issue of pluralism, of religious coexistence and so on. I have been openly outspoken, and in fact Google will show you that I've spoken quite extensively and written quite extensively in every one of these issues.
Well, Google has also shown me that you yourself, interestingly, have been criticised for being too liberal and your party for being too secular. Now, I know labels are easily thrown around when we're talking politically, but what do you say to those accusations?
Well, that's, first of all, I don't think you can be too liberal. I mean, for me, liberalism is not just politics or economics. It's also an attitude to life. I accept people as I find them. I don't judge them. I don't seek to change them. I let them and encourage them to be and say what they want to be and say, provided they don't harm others. That's my basic attitude to life in all my personal relationships as well as my political philosophy. And therefore, I don't think you can be too much like that. I think you should be like that. But having said that, as far as the word secular is concerned, it is a bit confusing to foreigners because secularism everywhere else means the absence of religion or distancing from religion, whereas in India, secularism has actually been used to mean acceptance of a multiplicity of religions, a profusion of religions, none of which is privileged by the state. So that's the sort of secularism we've practiced. It's not like the French laïcité where, you know, you can't wear a turban or a skull cap or a cross or a burqa to school or to any government office in France. In India, all of these can be worn and are worn every day in our streets, in our schoolrooms, in our government offices. Because what India says is you can be everything you want to be and everything is fine. We won't do you any particular favors because you belong to one faith, nor will we discriminate against you because you belong to another faith. And that is what we mean by secular in India, and that kind of secularism my party stands very strongly behind. Equally, I do want to say that in my book, Why I'm a Hindu, which has been out in India for the last few months and has been a subject to some vigorous debate, I have, in a sense, tried to change the terms of the debate, rather than, because it suits the forces allied to the ruling party, to portray the debate as one between true Hindus and godless secularists. And I, as a Hindu myself, want to challenge their version of Hinduism by saying that my Hinduism is deeply rooted in authentic Hindu ideas, teachings, texts, and precepts, but it is an inclusive Hinduism and not a bigoted and narrow-minded one. So I've taken the debate within the Hindu fold.
And you're obviously very articulate and you write about it with so much passion. Do you feel, though, that you have whitewashed some of the darker aspects of Hinduism? For example, you've been criticised for trying to absolve the religion of the fact that it is a caste system.
Well,
and untouchability is one of the defining parts of the Hindu system.
Not really. So my argument is that Hinduism is like this vast library full of different books written over millennia, none of which ever goes out of print, and you can pick and choose from them to constitute, as it were, your own faith. Unlike other faiths, Hinduism has no compulsory beliefs or rites of worship. There is no Hindu Pope, there is no Hindu Vatican, there isn't even a Hindu Sunday.
But the discrimination faced by Dalits is still very much ongoing, despite the fact that it's supposedly abolished.
Surely I'm coming to it. And the point is that So Hindu philosophy as a religious idea is one thing. The way in which Hindu society has behaved, as far as I'm concerned, is entirely contestable. One can argue it, challenge it, and many have done. Mahatma Gandhi, for example, was a true believing Hindu, and he was bitterly opposed to caste discrimination and untouchability. I am too. I have never asked the caste of anybody I've met or worked with or hired, and I wouldn't. For me, these are irrelevant issues.
But that's because presumably you're not a Dalit. You obviously
I've said this in the book.
So in the book you say, and I quote, "Despite the flaws in some of its practices, my admiration and pride in Hinduism outweighs my critical concerns." Would you say the same if you were a Dalit?
So my point is that it is entirely right to criticize the caste system as a system, which in any case got much more entrenched under British rule, even if we could find scriptural justification in earlier texts, and which has now become an instrument for political mobilization, so that people have used caste identity, particularly of the so-called lower castes, to mobilize votes and support in order to win benefits for these castes. And all of this is going on, and it's part of the great churn that Indian democracy is. But I don't believe that it's intrinsic to the faith. I have in my book given example after example, quote after quote, and incident after incident from the ancient texts, which show that caste is essentially not central to the faith, and that the essential religious beliefs of the faith assert that all of us have the same soul. The Atman within me, the soul within me, is the same as the Atman within you and within the Dalit and within the Muslim and within the Christian.
How does that get translated into everyday life?
And therefore, to my mind, in everyday life, equality must be enshrined. My constitution does enshrine equality, it outlaws discrimination, and it actually promotes affirmative action for the Dalits. The world's oldest and farthest reaching affirmative action program is the one in the Indian constitution. So I would say whether you're a Hindu or a Muslim, live by the Indian constitution, it guarantees you your rights.
One area where there are different viewpoints is Kashmir. Right now in Kashmir there have been a spurt of attacks on security forces, cross-border incidents, increased tensions. Do you feel that this is an intractable problem, and do you think that both governments, India and Pakistan, are doing enough to resolve that?
So far I believe they haven't been doing enough, but there have been some very encouraging, very recent developments. At the time of Ramadan, the Indian government declared a unilateral ceasefire in Kashmir and on the border with Pakistan-occupied parts of Kashmir. And it took a few days, but the Pakistanis have reciprocated. The ceasefire is holding. There haven't been any terrorist incidents or militant attacks. And interestingly enough, there's now a new sense in the air that all sides concerned, that is both the Indians and the Pakistanis, but also the Kashmiri militants, may be willing to talk. Now, this is such a fragile and early evolution of the situation that I don't want to sound too optimistic. Hopes have been dashed in the past. But I think this is the only way forward. If the governments can get to a point where all stakeholders, including, of course, the democratically elected government of the Indian state of Kashmir, can sit down together and see how they can reconcile. You know, we've had...
Do you think, in terms of reconciling, that there would be any room for the plebiscite, which the UN said in a resolution could be the way forward?
No, that unfortunately was never possible because the Pakistanis never withdrew
because
as
the
a UN
Indian
resolution.
government resisted that.
No, it was India that proposed the plebiscite.
It was the Indian government that put a stop to the
Shiulie,
plebiscite.
You've got the history wrong, and I'm sorry, this is my subject. India proposed the idea of a plebiscite, which of course in 1947-48 it was very confident it would win, since there had been this invasion of Kashmir by irregulars and then soldiers from Pakistan who had committed loot and rape and God knows worse. And the Kashmiri people were quite upset and were quite angry with what had happened. And so India said, let's have a plebiscite. And the UN resolution said, number one, all Pakistani forces must withdraw. Number two, Indian forces must be reduced. And number three, a vote must be held for a plebiscite. Since the number one never happened, the Pakistanis never withdrew. Number two and three never happened and no plebiscite was held. But since then, there have been a number of free and fair elections.
If those conditions were fulfilled, if the Pakistani troops withdrew, you're saying the Indian government would be amenable?
Not at all. No, I'm saying that 70 years have gone by and we've had at least 10 free and fair elections in Kashmir since then. That's far better than a plebiscite. You've allowed
people in Kashmir say they want self-determination.
Well, I don't think that's on the cards, in the sense that there is going to be no further change of borders. The subcontinent has suffered enough from the horrors of the partition of 71 years ago, and I don't think we're going to abide by we're going to abide any other partition, any further lines being drawn or redrawn. But after all, what is self-determination? It's the ability to determine your own political destiny.
And 68% of the population are Muslims. Perhaps
Yes.
they feel they would prefer to belong to Pakistan.
And then what happens to the rights of the other 32? If the 4% of Indians who are Kashmiri Muslims have rights that the other 96% don't, is that democratic either? You know,
But you see, if
go
you
back and
talk
forth
about
on these
the
numbers.
British Empire imposing its will on a people and Hindu nationalists imposing their will on people, then where does that leave you when you talk about the rights of people in Kashmir who may want a different direction?
No, I think human rights are extremely important. That is the right, first of all, to be able to live in peace, to be able to make your own choices.
So why not let them
give your
make their own
children a better
choice?
future? Because there's a line that's drawn this side of anarchy. And absolutely, in fact, talk to most Indian Muslims. The last thing they would tell you they want is a separation of Kashmir on religious grounds, which they believe will make the position of 180 million Muslims in India untenable for the sake of 4 million Muslims in Kashmir.
But this is the thing. Are people talking to them? Do we know exactly what they want?
Of course. And in fact, the point I'm trying to make is, when you said things are bad, governments haven't done enough, and I said they may be getting better because they may be willing to talk. It's talking that is the only way forward to find a solution on Kashmir or any other problem. I was at the UN for many years, and I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times about the virtues of talking, even if nothing specific is accomplished, because the mere process of talking creates mutual understanding and respect.
Well, I agree with you there. I'm interested in the fact that you know, you were a UN official. You're exactly, very experienced diplomat, and yet you don't feel that the UN has a part to play in resolving.
No, on this particular issue, I mean, you know, we understand the genesis of this problem far too well. You know, we don't have any particular difficulty understanding each other, the Indians, the Pakistanis. I think that the Kashmiri people, whether they wish to be part of India or Pakistan, as some have been, as you know, for the last 70 years in territory controlled by Pakistan, the Kashmiri people must, at the end of whatever negotiation or talking or process occurs, enjoy the human rights the rest of us take for granted. But when it comes to political boundaries and that kind of issue of sovereignty, then other factors kick in, and no state is going to be voluntarily subjecting itself for dismemberment.
Let's talk about wider politics, because of course India has elections coming up
Within a year.
next year. What are the important factors, do you think, that will govern the outcome of those elections?
Well, there is obviously at one fundamental level a judgment call to be made by the Indian voter on whether they're better off under this government, which promised them a lot of dreams of economic development and growth and prosperity that haven't materialized. Young people voted for Mr. Modi in droves. He said he'd create 20 million jobs a year, 2 crore jobs a year. Well, I'm afraid at the end of 4 years, we've had precisely 1.8 million jobs and not the 8 million altogether that should have been created. So it doesn't look terribly promising on the economic front. And as I've mentioned a bit earlier in our conversation, the disasters of demonetization, the botched rollout of GST and so on have meant that even the few initiatives undertaken by this government have failed to deliver either prosperity or benefits to the Indian people. So economics are really the first key issue, and in most elections in most democracies, voters vote their wallets, vote their pocketbooks, and I think clearly here the government is going to have a real challenge. Secondly, there is this very important question of what kind of India do you want your children to grow up in? I believe that most Indians cherish the pluralism of India. Most Indians don't want an India of cow vigilantes and mob lynchers. Most Indians want an India where people are free to be themselves and get along with their neighbors and go about their business in peace. And that sort of India clearly calls for a vote against those in the government who have unleashed the negative forces that most people today are opposed to. So they've given you the two big national issues, that is economic and the plural secular identity of India. And then there'll be a third set of issues which are a little more locally related to the states in which elections are happening. And at the end of the day, all of them together will give you the result.
So Congress, of course, has been in power before, but what are you going to do to capture, to appeal to voters, particularly the young voters who, as you say, are looking for a better India to grow up in?
Well, I think very happily we will appeal both on the basis of our past record, because we have brought about transformative governance changes in this country. And we will also talk about the fact that we have an experienced and qualified and rather deep bench of able people. It's not one man on a white horse with his upraised sword who says he knows all the answers and is going to cut through the knots of all our problems. That hasn't worked for the last 4 years. Much better to have a team of people who will come and listen to you, understand what's on your mind, and work with you to find solutions. That's what we offer.
Shashi Tharoor, thank you very much indeed for speaking with TRT World.
Thank you, Shiulie.